laugh as we go along.
Sounds good.
Nice one. All right. Well, welcome to our fourth podcast for Designs Ops Align. I am welcomed by very special guests. Actually, we are old friends.
Yeah.
We're actually ex-colleagues. We're not going to name anything. We know our NDA rules. But yeah, I want to welcome to the show a very talented person in the field, Will Trump. Will, do you want to give a quick introduction about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Naresh, good to be on the podcast. Thanks for having me on as a guest. I lead a small behavioral science consultancy now called Unconventional Wisdom. Yeah, that's the logo in the background. It's only been going for about a year, so it's quite new, but it follows me doing exactly that for the last 10 years in insurance. So I was in a big insurance company, a big global reinsurer, and I led the way there in behavioral science within insurance. So we sort of started it off. I think we were the first reinsurer to do it. And we really proved across, I think, almost every single customer touch point you could think of, from renewal letters to underwriting forms, to health declarations, all the way through to doctors sending forms back faster. We proved that almost anything can be improved through behavioral science and psychology. And that's really what I've now taken on as my own little consultancy, working with 13 clients so far as my own little shop.
And I think one of the key things I was blessed to have when I was in my field, in my previous company, was the chance to work with the behavioral science team and work with yourself. And I really think it was the missing piece in the design conglomerate of, what we are meant to do and the people who are skilled in order to do stuff. And I think I had the opportunity of working with yourself and working with the behavioral science team that you manage. And I really want you to kind of like explain how integrating the behavioral science team into the UX design really, really helped from your perspective.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth starting off just with the definition of behavioral science, because some of these words, they fly around, people have different views. But in my mind, a few things, behavioral science is really the science of how human beings really behave, like they actually behave in the world. And the reason I say that is because usually people have views about how people should behave, right? Companies are always thinking, oh, if I lower the prices, people will buy my product. If I make it easy to buy online, that's what they should do. Why are customers not doing that? That's like the perennial question that almost every business up and down the world is saying, why is my customer not doing this? And behavioral science comes along and says, well, I've actually got some answers here about why people are behaving the way they are. And it's not always as rational as they think. That's why behavioral science is often associated with irrational behavior. But really, behavioral science is more about how humans think, so psychology. Yes, people are not always as rational as we think. Often they are very rational. So behavioral science helps with that. And actually shows how human beings are massively influenced by context. So the environment in which someone's making a decision massively influences their behavior. So that's actually a good thing for designers, for UX people, because you are building environments, you're building the choice architecture, and actually you can therefore shape people's behavior by shaping the design. So that's what behavioral science is. It's sort of the laws of psychology applied to designing environments. And that's why this word nudge is basically a redesign of an environment to nudge people to change their behavior. So that's what behavioral science is. And why is behavioral science such a good partner in crime for UX, which is exactly what you're saying, Naresh. We did that together in previous jobs. I think it's because, I would put it this way, good UX is a necessity, but it's not sufficient. So it's necessary, but not sufficient. So I'm not against good UX. I think if you don't have good UX, people are never going to buy the product and complete the online journey or whatever it is you're building. You need good UX. Something needs to be intuitive, easy to do. If it's not intuitive or easy to do, most likely people will fail in that task. So good UX is necessary, and I love working with UX designers. But good UX is not sufficient, because so often good UX fails on the motivation side, making something persuasive. And here's where I'd like to introduce my top recommendation to everyone listening to this podcast is a model called COM-B, C-O-M and B, COM-B. I came across this a few years ago, but it's only grown in its influence on me. People often talk about nudges and biases, and they have these checklists. Actually, I think COM-B is the most useful one, because the B of COM-B is behavior. And to get to B, you have to go through C, O, and M, which is capability, opportunity, and motivation. If I could have this tattooed on my body, I would. Capability, opportunity, and motivation. People have to be capable to do an action, firstly. So, for example, they have to be psychologically capable. They have to understand the question. They have to, you have built them, a journey. They have to be able to do it capable. But you also have to give them the opportunity. That's the O of Combi. So, have you built a seamless online journey? That's usually what UX guys are focused on. So that's O. So that's important. C O. But then M, motivation. And if you fail on the M, you won't get the B. If there's no motivation, it doesn't matter how good the website is. It doesn't matter that people are smart enough. If there's no motivation, there's no behavior. And this so often, I'm afraid, neglected by the UX designers. They just say, if I make it accessible, if I make it easy to buy, that will fix it. And unfortunately, human beings need the motivation. And dare I say, when you've got motivation, actually, the C and the O are much less important. You've been, like me, motivated to do stuff in your life, like get a mortgage on a house or apply for a passport renewal. And you're motivated to do it because of that holiday or that house. And you'll go through all kinds of pain because you're motivated. So actually, making a journey easy is important and it's great. But actually, if you get motivation right, the ease of the online journey becomes actually less important because people go through with it. And the field I've worked in for 10 years or more is mainly insurance and mainly life insurance, where there's a massive motivation gap.
Yeah.
And insurance have done a good job at making it more, available online. They made it more, the opportunity and the capability has gone up, but not really the motivation. And that's what I work on a lot, is redesigning messaging to make it more persuasive. Once it's persuasive and people have been motivated, then actually they go through and they fulfill on that purchase.
There's always that aspect that, but in the design field, that behavioral science is only just focusing in the content. Now I'm totally against that. I always think that behavioral science can work on many, many different fronts. And I think, how would you explain how a behavioral scientist can work with a graphic designer or a UX designer? Because we know it works very, very well with content. It's very, very structured along that. But how is it best? How should you say it? How can I reword this? How can you get the best value, or how can designers get the best value from a behavioral science in their design process?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that behavioral science comes to life when you're working on the environment where someone's making decisions. So usually that's words. Let's just be frank about it. A letter, an email campaign, a website look and feel, that is covered in words that are either doing a good job, they're persuasive, or they're doing a bad job, they're confusing, and they're not persuading the user to take a certain behavior. So I do think behavioral science and words are closely connected. So I'm not going to try and deny that. But there's a lot more than just words to behavioral science. It's also about how information is presented in the first, the structure, the architecture, the timing of an offer, for example, is really important. I did a project a few years ago where we found that if you say to people on the phone, hey, you're signing up for this free life insurance, right, that's all done now. Or before you go, would you like to top up to pay a bit of, £5 a month for a bigger policy? We found that was not very effective at all. But if you changed the timing of the offer on the script and you said, oh, I'm here to set up your free policy. While I'm doing that, would you like me to look at options to upgrade? Actually, I think 2 times more people, twice as many people were signing up to the upgrade because it was being done at the right time on the call. So yes, that's content, but it's actually about sort of choice architecture. Timing can make a big difference, because the problem with the first script design is that people had already mentally checked out, right? Oh, it's all done. When someone says the words before I go, you've already kind of ignored what they're about to say. So it's about the timing of the offer. It's about the look and feel of the offer. But I do think behavioral science is quite closely tied to the power of words to persuade. And actually, I would almost push back on that and say, well, actually, words is so much of what we do. If you think about something like insurance or pension savings or debt collection or any of these industries, they really rely on the power of words to persuade, because they don't have other products. You're not parting with a physical good that someone can then unbox and open up. No, it really is just a promise, and therefore it's used are super powerful.
I guess when you think about your field and generally with behavioral science, I think ethical or ethics in general comes into play very, very tightly with your work. And how do you balance that on being ethical as well as being kind of business driven, or how do you say, goal driven, to reach what the business want out of a product?
Yeah, I mean, that's such an important question. It's not one that I bat away. In fact, since basically the day one of me working in behavioral science, 2013, that was the first question at one of the seminars I ran. So it's always been around as a question, and that's important. It's important in all fields, but especially I think in fields like financial services where there is natural distrust. So, are you using these techniques, these psychological insights?
Hmm.
Are you misusing them to manipulate people? I think it's a legitimate question. And I can say hand on heart, no, we're not at all. I mean, I would start off by saying, is the product we're presenting to customers good for the customer? Just in general terms, we are not
Hmm.
to rip people off. Make sure these products that actually meet a customer need, they're good value, they pay out when someone dies or has an accident. So starting point, is it a good product? If it is a good product and it's not unethical in itself, right? And we're not selling drugs here, we're selling insurance, for
Hmm.
example. So
Yeah.
if it's a good product, then there's nothing to stop us doing that effectively, persuasively. In a sense, it would be a bit unethical to present the product badly and in a non-persuasive, confusing way. That would be unethical, I think.
Yeah.
And yet,
Yeah.
if you stop and think about it, for years, insurance companies have basically been doing that, maybe unintentionally.
Hmm.
They use jargon, mumbo jumbo that customers don't understand,
Yes.
and
Yes.
people aren't buying policies because they haven't really understood the need or what the product does. So, firstly, is it a good product? Yes, it is. Therefore, I can present it persuasively. But having said that, when I'm then designing a marketing campaign or copy for an email or letter or web page, I always do go through a few additional checks like, is everything we've said here true, accurate, and not misleading? That's a very easy question to go through. If I'm
Yeah.
saying 26,000 people a year suffer from this condition. Is that
Yeah.
actually true, right? Check your facts. If it's true, you can say it. If 90% of customers are renewing their policy every year, that's very powerful. That's social norms. But is it true, right? Make sure you're saying stuff that's actually true and not in any way misleading. And I think the second one is it's not right to restrict choice against the interests of the customer. Sometimes you
Mm.
can restrict choice, rather than 12,000 health insurance plans to choose from, which will confuse people. Here's the top three options. But let's not make the top three the most expensive three, right? That will be
Hmm.
restricting choice in a way that's not fair or in the customer's best interest. Let's present a budget offer, a comprehensive option, and one that maybe covers, dependents. So
Yeah.
we're,
Yeah.
we're presenting choice. We might be restricting choice, but I think in that example, if the customer says, I want to view all 14,000, cover types, we should give them that chance to do so. So choice can be restricted to help customers, but it shouldn't be restricted against their best interests. And a very clear example of this, I think, would be things like claims and cancellations, right?
Yeah.
If a
Yeah.
customer's saying, I want to make a claim or I want to cancel my policy, are we restricting their choice against their best interest by saying, you must send us a cancellation form by carrier pigeon, right? That's just not which is sometimes what companies do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We need to receive it within 5 minutes of this email. It's like, it's not fair to
Yeah.
do that. So I think cancellations and making a claim, why is it that the same company that makes the purchase process super easy makes the claims process super difficult? That's
Yes.
obviously
Yes.
unethical. We all know it. And
Yeah.
and I guess my final test is the in your heart of hearts test. Would you be comfortable talking to your mum or your grandma about this?
Hmm.
In my case, there's been one project where an insurance company actually specifically asked me to say, can you help us on this campaign where we want to nudge people to cancel their policy because otherwise, if they keep the policy, they will end up making claims and that'll be bad for the insurer. And I didn't feel comfortable with that. I was like, no, actually, these customers have bought this policy.
Yeah.
We should not be doing that. Yeah, we can present information about the products. They can choose to switch, but we shouldn't be kind of nudging them in one way or another if it's not in their best interest. And I just walked away from that project. So very few and far between, but I think having a strong kind of ethical backbone and a framework can help navigate this difficult world.
That's really good to hear, Will, and that's really good that you have some standards
Yeah.
personally,
Yes.
for being in this industry. And loads of people would have just taken that project and say, "Hey, I just run with it." And you stand up for very good ethics, which is very impressive and admirable. And I'm very glad that you brought
Yeah.
that up. And
Well, can I just add to that, Naresh? I think good ethics is good business as well. So,
yes,
in a way,
yeah,
yeah, I was doing it because it felt like the right thing to do, but also long term in business, I think if you screw your customers over, they end up posting bad reviews about you. They don't
yes,
products, they don't renew, they tell all their mates, and sooner or later your company sort of tanks. So I think we've seen repeatedly actually things like good claims processes can actually boost advocacy. In
hmm,
fact, really fascinating in life insurance. Often we ask people, would you recommend this company to your friends?
yeah,
And often that question is asked after purchase. So you've just bought a policy. Hey, would you recommend this life insurance to your friends? And so many customers reply saying, I don't make recommendations after purchase. That would be weird. Who goes down the pub and says, I just bought life insurance? It was really easy to buy online. Let me tell
yeah,
my, that's never happened. However, at the point of claim, We've had people when their spouses passed away
Hmm.
and the process has been really quick, claim paid out within 2 or 4 days. And they say, I've now told all my friends how well I was treated at the point of claim. I've
Yes.
told my kids, they've already bought a policy. So there's something about the point of claim that actually seems to create, if you can get a good customer experience, it seems to create a kind of advocacy referral system. So I do think good ethics and treating customers well at the point of renewal, claim, even complaints,
Yeah.
even though those typical customer touch points can actually create huge benefits for the company.
Yeah. I mean, you point out it's like, somebody's just passed away, whether it's a family member, or a loved one. And it's at that point where companies need to be ethical and help them. And what better than helping somebody when they're in their worst state? Just to give them a bit of light down the tunnel. And it's not unethical to say, hey, you know, send out your feedback or share this, because you're sharing something
Yeah.
that's really good that's happened when they needed it the most, and a company has come in and done the ethical right of paying out, giving the right money when they need it the most. And I think that's the best, as you just mentioned, it's the best time to share that information. And so, yeah, and I think, you know, from a UX perspective, designers and researchers will know that,
Yeah.
you know, and I think behavioral science really does highlight these kind of key things which are just missing in the design process. And I'm going to take two steps back. I think one of the key things I noticed when I was working with yourself and your team was the ability for the behavioral science team to really show us how to structure the designs that would
Mm.
be, one, ethical, two, as you just mentioned, nudging,
Yeah.
and kind of showcasing the benefits and everything. And I think we really expanded on our designs by having
Mhm.
you very, very early in our design process. And I think a lot of teams can really, really jump on the bandwagon with that. If they bring behavioral science in
Yeah.
very early in their design process, they will see the benefits down the long run
Yeah.
on their designs meeting what they're meant to do. So I would definitely advocate for more businesses to hire Will if you're looking for somebody. So
Yeah, I mean, we
um
we found that with we've become quite deeply bedded into some UX design teams actually across a few different companies now in the last year. One in America, one in Ireland, and one actually now in Germany. And in all
mhm,
cases, we're that kind of that. So we the word that they use is team augmentation, and I love that word.
yes.
The CTO of this company in the States said, "Will, I love the way you guys augment my team," and that's kind of the way I view it. You know, we still need UX design. I'm not trying to get you
Hmm.
guys a job. We need it. I can't design anything to save my life. So it's not,
Hmm.
there's no competition here. But here with the behavioral sciences, you have someone whose specialism is almost to have a relentless, ruthless focus on, is there anything here that could confuse the customer or get in
Yeah.
the way of the desired behavior, psychologically
Hmm.
speaking? And is there anything, conversely, that we can harness, some levers we can pull to persuade them to go through? And often I feel like the curse of knowledge and the kind of, you know, inward thinking of a business can actually get in the way of really thinking about it from the customer's perspective. I'll give you
Yeah.
an example. One of the companies we were working with, a health insurance company, wants to nudge people to consider switching from their existing health insurer to them. Well, of course you would. You know, let's get some new customers. But to
Hmm.
do that, customers need to think about the current level of cover they're on. They need to compare their options. They need to type in all their details. It's quite complicated. And then they'll
Yeah.
see what the options of this new company is, and they'll decide if they want to switch or not. Now, that whole process from the customer's perspective, I would describe that as thinking about switching, right? You know, first
Hmm.
is you got to consider it, then you got to look at your options, then you got to compare them, and then you got to choose whether to switch or not. But from the health insurance perspective, all they're thinking of is switch. So they called it the switch journey. And
Yeah.
the homepage said, like, ready to switch. It was the main call to action. You know,
Yeah.
yes, begin switch now. And I was thinking, well, the customer is not ready to switch now at all. You know, they have literally
Hmm.
arrived on your website. Maybe they saw something online, they had a radio advert, I don't know what, and they're considering switching. They're not ready to switch. You
Yeah.
need to persuade them. So we just shifted it to say, like, are you thinking about switching? Let's start by comparing quotes. Let's show you the best deal available. Then you can decide. So like I said, a ruthless diagnostic of
Yeah.
what behavioral barriers that could get in the way. Because the thing with humans is they're so complicated, and you fail at any of these points, people drop off, right? And
Yeah.
when people look at this funnel and they say, oh, why are only 2% of people converting? That's because the other 98, you've lost them one way or another along the way,
Yeah.
because it's not been clear, or you've not used the right wording, or it wasn't the right time. And so actually just trying to tweak these words one by one. Actually, we implemented these changes, and it's actually having quite good impact. So really pleased to see that small changes from, oh, switch, to actually consider switching,
Yeah.
or pair my options. That's really how they're thinking. And in a way, I think, well, surely the business should have known that. They didn't need Will. But again, it's what this CTO guy in the States calls the face palm moments of working with me. Is like,
Yeah.
I say it, they're like, of course. But then it's like, well, why hadn't they thought of it before then? So I think the behavioral scientist does help with that slightly external perspective,
Hmm.
purely looking at it from the customer's behavior, what could get in the way, what could confuse them. And that's usually necessary, I think, because the business is so focused on the what. Right? They've built the tool, they've
Yeah.
built the journey, and they've got their goal, which is, in this case, switching. And they're just thinking, right, let's get people through and switch, and let's make it easy, forgetting that actually you might lose people along the way if it's not clear or persuasive.
It's always the thing of the little adjustments make up the big picture. And I think that's where I really see behavioral science really
Yeah.
adding that additional value on data and research that sometimes a UX researcher doesn't find. I'll bring up this point. I mean, running design for line is one of the key things that we have a clear distinction between UX designers and UI designers. And there's always that kind of misconception that a behavioral scientist should be a UX researcher.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I think differently. I think they should be separate. And I wanted to get your views and opinions about that.
Yeah. I think UX research is where I think a behavioral scientist can so blend in that they would look synonymous or look identical.
Hmm.
That's why I think I can see that the spirit behind your question. And actually, there's been one client that's actually just asked us to take over their UX research team. They actually lost a couple of people in UX research, and they
Hmm.
just said, well, Will, can you just take over and run our research program for these 2 or 3 key projects? And we could, because we're really good at research. And I think
Hmm.
behavioral science, or behavioral research, as it's almost the names on the tin. We really specialize in research, and so I see that overlap. However, I think behavioral science is also about designing context and environments to be persuasive, and that often involves content and writing, copy, as we discussed earlier. But I think where research and behavioral science really work well, kind of hand in hand, I think is because behavioral science is all about understanding the underlying drivers of behavior.
Hmm.
And I think behavioral science would say research is made up of 2 things. It's based on what customers can tell you and what they can't. So
Yeah.
behavioral science, whereas traditional research really focuses on what customers can tell you. Like, let's ask customers, put the microphone in front of them, they'll tell us what's wrong with this journey or this product. And behavioral science would say, well, that's interesting, but let's also learn from what they can't tell you. And that's what I think behavioral science does. So let's start with what they can't tell you. What they can't tell you is what's going on psychologically with the subconscious drivers of behavior. Or people either can't tell you or they won't admit to it, right? I will never admit to the fact that I bought this brand new watch because my neighbor did, or my colleague at work did. I don't want to say
Yeah.
that loud because it just makes me sound rubbish and whatever, envious. No. I'll say, oh, the reason I bought it is because I needed a new watch or I like the features. And that's the same for many things in life. There are many reasons we do things which you can't get to even with good asking questions. So you need A/B testing. And again, most designers, UX designers, are familiar with A/B testing. To
Hmm.
describe it as a randomized control trial. So where people are put into different groups randomly, not by age, gender, whatever, no, just by randomization. And each group gets shown something different. So slightly different website, different product, different features, different wording, and you just observe which one's more effective. And an A/B test, I would say, is the gold standard. That's the proof of the pudding is in the eating, isn't it? It's when you see that new wording getting an uplift in conversion rates. That's when I find the arguing stops in the business, because there's no arguing with numbers, right? It was
Hmm.
23% conversion rate. We changed this button. Now it's 27%, right? That must be working. That's
Yeah.
the kind of A/B testing. The gold standard of behavioral research is behavioral testing. So that's the first part, what customers can't tell you, but also what customers can tell you, right? People can reflect on their priorities, on what matters to them, and it is worth listening to that. So I think behavioral scientists make really good researchers. I think behavioral scientists have quite high customer empathy, which I think is the
Hmm.
number one thing you need in research. Empathy meaning I understand and I want to know the world from your perspective. Um,
Yeah.
I think so much of the issues in research, I mean, I've been in business for 14 years, and most of the time when someone, usually a senior salesperson, says, I want to do research on this, what they really mean is, I want customers to tell me that my idea was great. So we should go ahead with it because I'm going to do it anyway. And
Yeah.
there's a fantastic quote, I can't remember who said it, which says that some people use research like a drunk man uses a lamppost for support rather than information. And that is exactly right. People go, oh yeah, I want to do this. I want to build this new website, this new app, this new wearable device.
Yeah.
Therefore, let's just get some customer research. And usually the problem is customers are all too happy to agree, because if you bias the audience and you bias the way you ask questions and you lead the witness, people will all too gladly agree with that. And so what we try and do is we really try and look for illumination rather than just validation. We're saying, are we genuinely interested in what customers think about this? I'll give you a concrete example. In insurance, there's this thing called second medical opinion. It's a feature that many insurance companies have offered their customers as part of their life insurance policies for many years. And it basically means that if you get really ill and your doctor gives you a diagnosis, this feature can kick in on your policy to get a second medical opinion from another world expert in that condition. Now, most insurers would say this is a fantastic feature, but they scratch their head about why are so few customers using it? It's like below 3 or 4%. And the behavioral scientist in me goes, okay, here we have something interesting, right? A good feature that is factually good value, it's rationally speaking good for customers in that moment of need, and yet they're not making use of it. That's fascinating. What's going on? And many surveys have been done that just ask customers straight up, is this a good idea? And customers often say, yes, I love the sound of it, but then they never get around to using it. And so we sort of set out, dare I say, to disprove whether this actually is good value and a good idea. And we asked some slightly more provocative questions, like saying things like, have you ever used medical second opinion? Do you know where you would go for it? And then thirdly, we asked this statement. We said, do you agree with this statement? Getting a second medical opinion is quite awkward because it tells my current doctor that I don't trust them. And 90% of people agreed with that statement, that actually getting a second medical opinion is awkward because it's sort of telling my doctor I don't trust their diagnosis. And I would say there we got to the bottom of the matter, right? We got to the heart of the matter, which is there is a behavioral barrier that is so deeply ingrained, which is I want to please my doctor because he's looked after my family for 20 years.
Yeah.
This fancy feature that the insurance company had built called second medical opinion was not flying. And they're like, well, what's going on? And it takes almost an empathetic researcher that's looking for illumination, not just validation, to really go into it and find out. And so we've done this repeatedly where we prove or try and even disprove whether customers really need something. And usually that gets to the bottom of actually this feature, let's drop it because customers are not that interested. And there is another feature here that they really like the sound of, like regular rewards or I don't know, discount for adding a second beneficiary on your policy, whatever it is. Look for something that people genuinely value, where there's many fewer of those barriers in place. So I think that's why behavioral scientists make good UX researchers or work well together with UX researchers, because they're both interested in what's going on the underlying level. And I guess for me, the goal of research, whether you're a UX researcher or behavioral scientist, the goal of research, I think, is to increase confidence in what you're building, that it will actually work. That's really what the research is doing. It's saying I'm doing some of the work up front, because once we launch it, we'll learn if it works or not. But let's find out, get as much confidence as possible. We'll never get to 100% confidence, but let's get from 50% flip a coin, will this work or not, to maybe 70%. We've got a good grounding in what customers are telling us, and we've adapted it and shaped it around customer needs and preferences.
One of the biggest things, and I think we've never had this conversation, is how do you deal with the challenge of supporting users from many different countries? Because they all have like a different ideology, different view, different take on stuff. How do you deal with that, like being a behavioral scientist?
I mean, my view is that humans are more similar than they are different. So it's quite different. These days you tend to talk a lot about the cultural differences, take a lot about differences between countries and languages. And right now I'm working on a project that involves complaints letters in Germany. And you'd think, wow, well, what's this British guy going to be able to do to complaints letters in Germany? But actually, I think behavioral scientists says that humans are humans, right? They are basically haven't changed much for a few thousand millions of years. The underlying stuff going on is pretty common, standard. Therefore, if you can harness that, if you could name me a culture or a country where people want to get confusing messages that don't make sense, of course, it doesn't exist. People want clarity. They want something that's persuasive. So my starting point is to think that human behavior is human behavior, and actually there's more similar between humans And I think a few studies have come out recently that show, for example, there are more differences within a country than they are between countries. So when we say like, oh, Americans like it this way rather than Germans like it this way or the Irish
Yeah.
like it this way, actually that's just not true. Within America, you've got pockets that are vastly different from each other, and within
Hmm.
Ireland as well. So I would typically go with that sort of messaging to think, actually, let's not just think about cultural differences. Let's think about how people work. And basically, I think the more information you have on your target customer, the more you can shape your messaging to them, right? So if you know that here's a customer group that really is focused on price because they're on a tight budget, and they need to make decisions fast because they're really busy lives, then let's shape the messaging around that and let's make it as persuasive for them. Or
Yeah.
if you another group that actually is willing to spend the time comparing 100 different types of insurance before they make the right call, then let's tweak the messaging for them. And I think, the last few years have shown that that kind of data and personalization, targeting can now be done. Previously, it couldn't. So I would use that. I would use the data we have to target people with the right offer rather than starting off by thinking, oh, here I'm dealing with people from this country, therefore I need to change it this way or that way.
Brilliant. Well, there's going to be a lot of people who might listen to this podcast who are in the UX field. I would say predominantly people that are in the UX research field. And what advice would you give to them if they now want to take this step and move from being a UX researcher to a behavioral science? What would you say are the key skills and the
Yeah.
key learnings they need to do in order to be a behavioral
Yeah.
science?
Yeah, I think there's a lot they can read out there, right? I literally just picked up one book and then it led to the next 20 or 30 books. So there's loads of books out there. You can read Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a bit like the Bible of behavioral science, right? It's the really solid one. It's quite theoretical, but it's super helpful. That's by Daniel Kahneman. A more accessible book called The Choice Factory by Richard Shotton. I really like that. 25 simple chapters each about one of these biases. Or one of my favorites is Made to Stick, all about how some messages really persuade and get in your mind and others really don't. So those would be a few books you could start off by reading. There's plenty of podcasts online. You can watch loads of videos. You can probably go through a virtual master's practically based on the stuff that's online now, or you can do a proper master's, right? Or proper, university degree. So I think inform yourself, be inspired by what's out there. There's so many fantastic examples of behavioral science in the wild. If I can connect with you on LinkedIn, like let's do it that way. But then I think if you are a UX researcher, start behaving like a behavioral scientist, by which I mean a few things. Firstly, stop trusting every word the customer says as if it's absolute truth, right? Like we said earlier, there are some things customers can tell you and there are some things they can't. So if you're a UX researcher, start acting like a behavioral scientist by saying, oh, well, maybe customers have said that, but that's not the whole picture. Maybe users are telling us this, but maybe there's some other underlying stuff, and let's test it through maybe more in-depth research, like we just said, or we could do an A/B test, which will really prove what works or what doesn't. So I think that's the first thing. And secondly, run these A/B tests, these experiments. I literally would say to anyone who starts in behavioral science, you can become a behavioral scientist quite quickly just by running A/B tests. I think for me, an A/B test is the hallmark of a behavioral scientist. It's someone who actually is willing to say, we don't know the answer, but the results of the AB or ABCDE test, right, however many iterations you can run, that will teach us what works. And I've been wrong so many times on what I think is going to work, right? We did this quite famous study where we wanted to nudge people from paying by check, so sending in a check once a quarter, to switching to direct debit, like an automatic fund transfer way. And we were able to run a 5-way trial. So the control group and 4 other groups received 4 different letters, and it was totally randomized, about 10,000 people in every group. That's what gets a behavioral scientist really excited, is this idea of being able to run a trial. And there was the first one was a rewritten letter that was more persuasive about the benefits. The next one was like a £10 voucher. Like, if you switch to direct debit, we'll send you £10. That's like a conditional incentive. The next one was a unconditional voucher, which was like, hey, we love you. Here's £5 to enjoy, a voucher at a local coffee shop. By the way, could you help us out by switching to direct debit? That's like, show them the love and see if they reciprocate. And then the final one was active choice, meaning, we need to hear from you. Are you going to switch or are you going to stay? And we ran this trial, and I got everyone in the office to say, which one of these do you think is going to work best? And I thought the active choice one was probably going to be the most effective, and it wasn't. It was actually the clear, persuasive message, the first of those tests I just described, by far had a 42% response rate compared to 14. So there's almost 3 times as many people responding, this letter at no cost, right? It didn't even have to give them the voucher because maybe, and this is where I guess the psychological underpinning comes in, maybe actually giving people a voucher was putting people off because they think, hang on, if you need to bribe me to do this with £10, maybe it's not in my best interest, right? People read lines really quickly. And actually, instead of that, just a more persuasive letter, here's the benefits of switching, here's what's in it for you, please do it, was the most effective one. So you run an experiment like this on a website or on a letter or an email campaign, even as a UX researcher, and pretty soon you can start taking on the mantle of a behavioral scientist, because a behavioral scientist is someone who designs experiments, doesn't only listen to what the customer says, but also brings in insights from psychology, which you may be reading about in these books or these podcasts or in a formal training, of course. But by running the trials, you become that guy or that woman in the office who's saying, the trial, the experiment, the A/B test proved that John's idea over there was the best one. And we all thought this was going to work, but it wasn't. And actually, it was the winner of all these experiments. It was not what we expected. And that's why I call my company Unconventional Wisdom, because often it's not the conventional thinking that actually wins. It's something unconventional that no one thought was going to make a difference.
I'm going to ask you one last question, Will. And I've been waiting to ask you this one for a while. A lot of people in the field, they, especially in the UX research field, I'm specifically pointing out them, they struggle to even get buy-ins from companies that they work in to do research. Many people, I'm talking, the list is massive. And, since we started Design Ops Alliance, we've spoken to, this uncountable how many people in the research field have said the same sentence to me. And it's the same sentence that they struggle just to get the buy-in to do basic research in any of their products. And the same sentence is always said to them. We can test it at the end. We can verify it at the end. We can do the research at the end. Or we already know the product. We already know the user. We don't need to spend money or resources in doing research in the beginning. Now, what can advice, or sorry, how can I rephrase this? What advice would you give to people out there in the field to try and get their ideas to stakeholders, to product managers? What would you say to kind of convince them the benefits of doing good research and good behavioral research?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, and you're right, it's up and down the land. Everyone has the same issue. I think, in an ideal scenario, a senior exec builds a new project, a new product, you've got a new website, and he says, yeah, research needs to be at the heart of this. We're going to do it properly with researchers. You guys, what do you suggest? That's the ideal scenario. And that happens, in my experience, in about the last 10 years, it's happened 2 or 3 times. Usually it's not like that. It's like the budgets are squeezed, the timelines are squeezed, and everything. And I think it helps, there's here a few of my tips. I think it helps for the UX researchers to be nimble. It doesn't help if you sort of stamp your feet and say, why are you not doing it properly? That doesn't really help. Actually, what are you recommending? So I've gone down this road of just being really nimble. Think about, almost like guerrilla warfare. What can you think of that could actually get some research output out of this quickly and within budget? And we've done a lot with surveys, right? I know surveys are not as detailed, for example, as an in-depth research phase, like maybe focus groups or one-to-one interviews, or maybe even like usability research, but maybe a quick set of 200-300 people going through a survey where you test a few of these assumptions up front. That might only cost a few $100 to really just run a quick survey, and it can be done within a couple of days sometimes. Actually, some survey tools get you research results within a couple of hours. So you can start the research really quickly. Usually you can convince someone on the project to say, right, I'm just going to do this little bit of research. It'll prove what works and what's getting buy-in and what's not. That's the first thing. Be nimble. Don't sort of stamp your feet and just say, look, we're smart researchers and no one wants to use us. I think that typically doesn't work. The second thing is try as much as you can to convince the senior stakeholders that it's about this confidence in what will work, right? Of course you can launch a product, but it's like flip a coin. Will it work or will it not? And in my experience, most things that companies build are not successful. I mean, it sounds harsh, but most digital journeys or initiatives fail because they don't take account for how customers actually think. It's just based on someone usually quite senior saying, let's build this. That's what customers want. But usually it's things like, that's what my mates want when I chat to them down the pub or the golf club. Or they'll wave a phone around and say, oh, everyone's got a phone now, so therefore we need to launch a wearable device. And I'm thinking, has this actually been tested with your target market, who are these 60 people? Like, probably not. So show that it'll dial up the confidence, be nimble. And the third one, maybe I won't be popular for this one, be patient. I mean, I've really done this one step at a time. I didn't overnight set up a behavioral science team. It took actually 10 years to get from start, which was 2 of us part-time. It took about 2 years to get a few of the early results, which actually were really good. And that helped then build and keep going. And then the team grew and grew progressively. And then it wasn't until then, after a lot further down the track, that then behavioral science, behavioral research become part of the furniture. Like, when we're building a new product, we wouldn't dare do it without research or without Will's team. So I think if you're patient and you're nimble, so you're looking for opportunities to show the value, to show how it's aligned, rather than sitting in the corner sulking, saying, well, no one's asking us for our input. That typically doesn't get buy-in. And maybe the final tip is communication of your insights. Unfortunately, I've come across quite a few UX researchers whose output does not do justice to their work, right? They have done incredibly good work. Like, it's like, wow, detailed interviews, usability testing, focus groups. And yet when you read the readout, right, the 2-pager or the conference page, it's like, it's just detailing, we spoke to this many people, rather than giving me the 4 or 5 big so what's, customers are unlikely to buy this product online. We should move back to a analog model, right? That should be insight number 1. Or insight number 2 should be, people struggle to deal with many different types of health insurance plans. Let's narrow it down to 3, right? So I think communication, is as important for a UX researcher as the essence of the job. And sometimes I think UX researchers miss this. They think, well, I know that the proper bit of the work is the UX research, right? Done my work. Actually, no, it's as valuable, as important, if not probably more in this day and age, to be able to communicate those core insights in a way that when you have that playback session with senior stakeholders, they should all be dialing in. And within about 10 minutes, they should all know what are the 4 or 5 things that Will has learned from this research that are going to shape our product and our project going forward.
Well, I think you said something which really resonates with me, in the sense of there's 2 things you said, actually. First thing is patience, and as you said, it didn't take overnight to build your team. And when we were working together, and I'm going to tell everyone from experience, and Will just said it outright, he was part of the furniture, and he and his team were the ones that we had to go to in order to start to build the designs, or build it with the product managers. So we would always go to Will's team, and he done that, as you mentioned, through hard graft, being patient, selling the benefits of behavioral science. And yeah, it really became the case that we would always have to run ideas, and he became one of those part of the workflow process. And I would give that advice to anyone: be patient, stick it out, show the benefits, keep selling the benefits of good research, good design, and you will see the fruits of your labor come, as Will mentioned. Will, from your experience, and I definitely want to make sure that our listeners are seeing the benefits of what your company does, what would you advise people listening to this podcast would be the best time to reach out to you and to your company, and even to actually come to yourself for advice? When would you say is the best time for them?
Well, we're behavioral change specialists. So if your challenge involves behavior change, we can help. And that really it's that simple. Usually companies are struggling with behavior change. That's actually the hardest thing they struggle with. Usually building a new product and launching it, and a new website, that's actually relatively straightforward. They know how to do it. But persuading customers to come to the website, buy a policy, renew it, tell the truth, send a form back, the behavior change elements, they're the really hard ones. And so usually our clients come to us when they're building something and they know there's a behavior change element to it that they either are worried won't work, and therefore they want our help building it so that it is going to work, or it's already not working and they want us to help fix it. So, when is the right time to come to us? Well, anytime, but sometimes companies come to us when there's a crisis, like, why are customers canceling? Let's fix that for us, Will, and I can do that. But I think it's nicer to do it a bit more upstream, right? We're building a new claims app. How can we do it so that customers aren't baffled and they get our main point, and they're persuaded to tell the truth and submit their claims, properly. So I really help companies build things with human psychology in mind, so that it's more persuasive and more effective. but it really works across all kinds of medium. And to be honest, Naresh, most of what I do still is on websites and also paper. I do so much on letters because companies still send letters to customers, right? Renewal letters, complaints letters. It all has to be done on paper in many of those cases, and each of those letters needs to be as persuasive as possible. I work with a debt collection agency, for example, that is trying to get more money off customers when they owe it. How can you make that as clear as possible? Yes, it involves an online journey, but it also starts with a paper letter that is currently often quite confusing. So anything that is a behavior change conundrum, if you're in an office where people are saying, why are customers not doing X, Y, and Z, then it's time to call Will.
Brilliant. Well, I will leave the link to your website and also to your LinkedIn profile as we kind of share this podcast. And Will, it has been a pleasure speaking to you. As always, we can speak for hours, and I think we've spoken for hours many, many times. And I hope other people who are listening to this podcast can take the benefit of reaching out to Will, because I guarantee you speak to him for half an hour, you will learn way more than 10 books than speaking to him in half an hour. I think everyone that meets Will has this effect on people. He can teach you a lot, and he can teach you a lot about the behavioral science. And I think it's within everyone's remit to reach out to him and ask for advice. And I'm looking forward for people to kind of reaching out and coming with the questions I did when we first met. So,
Sounds
hey,
good.
Will, thank you so much. Really, really a pleasure speaking to you. So,
Always a pleasure. Take care.